For about 100 years, rocks weighing as much as 700 pounds have been dragging themselves across a dry lake bed in Death Valley, leaving trails behind them that stretch for hundreds of feet. Nobody had ever seen it happen. Researchers have been coming out here since the 1940s. They proposed hurricane winds, magnetic fields, slippery algae. Some people just said aliens. Then, in December 2013, two cousins sitting at the edge of the lake bed heard a sound like ice cracking all over the valley floor, and roughly 60 rocks began to move at once. That story is number 10, and we are starting there, because what those two men found ended a mystery that had lasted a century. The Mojave Desert spreads across 4 states: California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. Millions of people cross it every year on the interstate between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and almost none of them leave the pavement. Everything on this list is off the pavement. Stay until number 3. There is a hole in the Nevada desert where the water moves when an earthquake hits the other side of the planet. The entire world population of one animal lives inside it, and 2 divers who went down to look never came back. If you like the places America filed away and forgot, subscribe. We post one of these every week. Today we are counting down 10 of them. Number 10. Racetrack Playa, the rocks that move themselves. You get there on a 28-mile gravel washboard road that most rental agreements do not cover. And when the road ends, you are standing at the edge of a dead flat lake bed, cracked into millions of pale mud tiles, ringed by dark mountains. Scattered across it are boulders, and behind every boulder there is a groove carved into the ground, long, curving, sometimes doubling back on itself, as if each rock had gone for a slow walk and left its signature. Nothing else out here moves. There are no plants on the playa, there is no water, there is usually no sound at all. The trails were reported as far back as the early 1900s, and the first formal experiments started in the 1940s. For 70 years, scientists measured, mapped, and guessed. The problem was simple and maddening. The rocks only move, by one estimate, about 1 minute out of every million. Nobody was ever standing there for the right minute. 2 cousins decided to fix that. Richard Norris is a paleobiologist at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Jim Norris is an engineer. In 2011, they started what they called the Slithering Stones Research Initiative. They set up a weather station, got permission to add 15 of their own rocks to the playa, and fitted each one with a GPS tracker. Then they settled in to wait. They expected to wait 5 or 10 years. In December 2013, they drove out and found the playa covered in a pond of water about 3 inches deep. Overnight, it froze. The next day, in the winter sun, the ice began to break apart, and Richard Norris heard a pop, pop, crackle roll across the valley in front of him. He turned to his cousin and said, "This is it!" Here is what 100 years of theories had missed. The ice was not thick. It was about 1/8 of an inch window pane ice. The wind was not a hurricane. It was roughly 10 miles an hour. But those huge floating panels of thin ice, pushed by that light breeze, pressed against the rocks and bulldozed them across the wet mud. Some 60 of them at once, gliding so slowly a baby could outcrawl them. The GPS confirmed everything. The paper was published in PLOS One in August 2014, and the story ran worldwide, from Nature to National Geographic. The playa is open. You can drive out, stand next to a rock, and read its trail like handwriting. And the same study carried one quiet warning. The movement needs freezing nights, and freezing nights in Death Valley are getting rarer. 100 years of magnetic fields and aliens, and the answer was ice too thin to hold a bird, witnessed by 2 cousins who were lucky enough to be sitting there for the 1 minute in a million. Number 9. St. Thomas, Nevada. The town that refused to stay drowned. On the morning of June 11th, 1938, a garage owner named Hugh Lord woke up with lake water underneath his bed. He gathered what he could carry, stepped into a rowboat, set his own house on fire, and paddled away watching it burn down to the waterline. He was the last resident of St. Thomas, and by June 25th, the town was gone, 60 feet under the new surface of Lake Mead. St. Thomas had been dying in slow motion for years. Mormon settlers founded it in 1865, where the Muddy River met the Virgin, and it grew into a proper farming town and a stop on the road between Salt Lake City and Los Angeles. Then came Hoover Dam. The dam went up far downstream, but the lake it created reached backward across the desert like a tide that never went out. Residents spent the 1930s dismantling houses they had lived in for generations. The cemetery was dug up and moved to Overton. The postmaster spent the town's final day of mail service, canceling roughly 5,000 letters and postcards from collectors who wanted a postmark from a town about to drown. That should have been the end. It was not. In 1945, drought pulled the lake down and the ruins broke the surface, and former residents held a reunion on the streets of their drowned town. It went under again. In 1962, it came back up and stayed exposed for 9 years, and they held another reunion. Then the water took it again. Then, in the early 2000s, the drought that has been draining Lake Mead ever since exposed St. Thomas one more time, and this time the lake never came back for it. The town has now been out of the water for more than 2 decades. Today it sits inside Lake Mead National Recreation Area, at the end of a dirt road about 9 miles south of Overton. A 2.5-mile loop trail runs through the ruins. Concrete foundations, cisterns, the steps of the schoolhouse, the shell of the ice cream parlor, with interpretive signs where the streets used to be. The ground it stands on was lakebed for most of a century, and if the water ever rises again, the town goes back under. A man burned his house rather than hand it to the lake. 80 years later, the lake is the one disappearing, and the town is still there. Number 8. Zzyzx, the fake healer's spa that became a real laboratory. The last road sign anyone expects to see on Interstate 15 says Zzyzx Road. It is not a joke, and it is not a glitch. It is the last word in the English language, invented by a con man specifically so it would be the last word, and the story of how it ended is better than the name. Curtis House Springer was a radio evangelist who called himself a doctor, a reverend, and a professor, with degrees from institutions that did not exist. In 1944, he filed mining claims on about 12,000 acres of federal land around a desert spring called Soda Springs, southeast of Baker. Instead of mining, he built a health resort, 60 rooms, a bathhouse, a church, a castle, an airstrip he called Zyport, and a main street he named the Boulevard of Dreams. He hauled in guests by the busload from Los Angeles, sold them mineral cures and a hemorrhoid remedy, and broadcast his radio show to hundreds of stations. The hot mineral pools were heated by a hidden boiler. It ran for 30 years. Then the federal government worked out that Springer was not mining anything, and that he had begun carving up public land and offering parcels to his biggest donors, selling America real estate he never owned. In April 1974, a federal judge ordered him evicted and gave him 36 hours to get out. He served jail time, retired to Las Vegas, and died in 1985. Here is the twist that earns this place its spot on the list. In 1976, the Bureau of Land Management handed the abandoned resort to a consortium of California State University campuses, and Springer's fake spa became the Desert Studies Center, a real working field station where scientists and students research climate, dune formation, archaeology, and desert ecology, sleeping in the con man's old guest rooms. And Springer, by accident, performed one act of genuine healing. The artificial pond he dug and named Lake Tuende, after his wife, turned out to be the last refuge of the Mojave tui chub, a fish that had lost nearly all of its native habitat. He had stocked his pond with them. Biologists have been managing that population ever since, spreading the descendants of a con man's decoration to new refugees across the desert. The medicine at Zzyzx was fake for 30 years. It has been real ever since. Number 7. Kelso, the town by the singing dunes. Head deeper into the Mojave National Preserve, and you hit 2 things that do not belong together. A grand Spanish-style railroad depot standing alone in creosote scrub, and a wall of sand 650 feet tall that makes a sound like a cello. The depot came first. Union Pacific built it in 1924 as a station, restaurant, and employee hotel. The restaurant was nicknamed the Beanery because steam engines needed water and helper crews to get over the grade. A town grew around it, and with wartime demand from the nearby Vulcan iron mine, Kelso reached a population of around 2,000. Then the mine shut in 1947, diesel engines stopped needing the water stop, and the town drained away over the following decades. When Union Pacific moved to demolish the depot in the 1980s, locals fought to save the building, and today it stands fully restored as the preserve's visitor center, a marble-floored waiting room with nobody waiting. The dunes are a few miles down the road, and they are the reason scientists keep coming back. The Kelso Dunes are one of only a handful of dune fields on Earth that boom. Climb to the crest. It is a brutal half hour of 2 steps up, 1 slide back, and push sand down the steep face, and the dune answers you. A low, resonant note swells out of the ground, loud enough to hear and strong enough to feel through your legs. For centuries, this class of sound was pure legend. Marco Polo heard singing sands in Asia and blamed spirits. Then researchers from Caltech spent years out here with geophones stuck in the sand and ground-penetrating radar, and in 2007 published a paper titled Solving the Mystery of Booming Sand Dunes. The dune, it turns out, is built like an instrument. A layer of loose, sun-dried sand about 5 feet thick sits on top of older, damp, compacted sand, and that layering traps the vibration of the avalanche and makes the whole hillside resonate. One researcher compared it to bowing the string of a cello. So the Mojave keeps a strange pair out there. A train station with no town, and a mountain of sand that plays notes. One of them went silent. The other one never has. Number 6. Rhyolite, the city that lasted 1 decade. Rhyolite had a stock exchange. Hold that thought. A stock exchange, an opera house, a public swimming pool, 3 banks, a school built for 250 children, concrete sidewalks, electric streetlights, and telephone lines in the Nevada desert, 4 miles from Death Valley, in a town that in 1904 did not exist. Gold was found in the Bullfrog Hills that year, and the rush built a city at a speed that is hard to process. Within months, there were thousands of people. Financier Charles Schwab bought in and wired the place for the 20th century. The Cook Bank building rose 3 stories, with marble stairs and mahogany trim, the tallest thing for 100 miles. A miner named Tom Kelly, faced with a desert that had no lumber, collected an estimated 30,000 empty bottles from the town's 50 saloons and spent 5 months in the winter of 1905 building himself a house out of them. Then, in quick succession, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake wrecked the rail links and spooked the capital. The financial panic of 1907 dried up the investment, and the ore itself turned out thinner than the stock certificates claimed. Mines began closing by 1910. The city that had risen in months emptied in a handful of years, and the power was eventually cut to a town that had been built around having it. What is left today is the most photographed ruin in Nevada. The Cook Bank still stands, 3 stories of broken concrete lace. The train depot survives whole, and the bottle house is still there. Paramount Pictures actually restored it in 1925 to use as a film set, which means a movie studio has now maintained Tom Kelly's house longer than Tom Kelly did. And at the edge of town, the desert got one more strange gift. In 1984, Belgian artist Albert Sukalski draped live models in plaster-soaked fabric and arranged the hollow white shrouds into a life-size ghost version of the Last Supper out on the open ground with Death Valley behind it. He expected it to survive 2 years. It has survived more than 40, and it now anchors the free, always-open Goldwell Open Air Museum. A city of speculators vanished in a decade. The 2 things still standing were built by a man with no money and an artist who expected to be forgotten. If this one is worth your time, drop a thumbs up. It genuinely helps. And if you have ever turned down a dirt road out here and found something you could not explain, put it in the comments. That is where half our future videos come from. And number 3 is still ahead, the hole in the desert. That one is stranger than anything so far. Number 5, the Integratron and Giant Rock, the time machine that missed its owner. In the high desert near Landers, California, there is a gleaming white wooden dome, 38 feet high and 55 feet across, built without a single nail. The man who built it said the design came from Moses' tabernacle, the writings of Nikola Tesla, and telepathic instructions he received from a visitor from Venus. His name was George Van Tassel, and before the desert, he was aviation establishment respectable, Douglas Aircraft, Lockheed, and work for Howard Hughes. In 1947, he moved his family out to Giant Rock, a freestanding boulder 7 stories tall covering 5,800 square feet of ground, and ran a small airfield and cafe beside it. The rock already had a history. A prospector named Frank Kritzer had dug out rooms and lived underneath it until 1942, when police came to question him, fired a gas grenade into his home, and detonated the dynamite he kept inside. Kritzer died under his own rock. Van Tassel began holding meditation sessions in Kritzer's excavated rooms, and in 1953 announced that a being from Venus had woken him, brought him aboard a craft, and given him a technique for rejuvenating human tissue. So he started building the machine. To pay for it, he held the Giant Rock Interplanetary Spacecraft Conventions, annual UFO gatherings that ran for 23 years and drew crowds reported at over 11,000 people, out on a dry lake bed in the middle of nowhere. He worked on the Integratron for more than 2 decades. And then, on February 9, 1978, with the building finished and the internal mechanism reportedly 90% complete, George Van Tassel died suddenly of a heart attack. No usable plans for the machine were ever found. The rejuvenation device outlived the man it was supposed to rejuvenate. Today, the dome is on the National Register of Historic Places and operates as one of the strangest attractions in California. The acoustics inside are so unusual that visitors book sound baths, lying in a circle beneath the wooden vault while quartz bowls ring. Giant rock still stands nearby, covered in graffiti, and in the year 2000, a massive slab abruptly split off its side, exposing clean white granite. Nobody has fully explained why. The machine never worked. The building does. Number 4. The Mojave phone booth, the loneliest number in America. In 1948, a phone was installed at a dusty crossroads in the East Mojave to serve volcanic cinder miners, 15 miles from the nearest pavement, a full day's drive from anywhere. For half a century, it stood there mostly in silence, a glass box among the Joshua trees, collecting bullet holes. Then, in 1997, a traveler noticed a tiny telephone icon printed in the empty middle of a desert map, drove out to confirm the booth was real, and wrote a short letter about it to an underground zine, including the number. A man in Arizona named Godfrey Daniels read that letter and could not let it go. He started dialing the desert. Every day, multiple times a day. For about a month, nothing, and then one day, a busy signal. Someone was on his phone booth. He redialed in a frenzy until a voice answered. A cinder miner who had no phone of her own and used the booth as her line to the world. Daniels built a website about the booth, the New York Times picked up the story, and the early internet did the rest. Strangers began calling from every continent, around the clock. Other strangers drove into the desert, camped beside the booth, and answered. People reported conversations with callers from all over the planet, at a glass box in the middle of absolute nothing. For about 3 years, the loneliest phone in America never stopped ringing. That was the problem. The booth stood inside the newly created Mojave National Preserve, and the pilgrimage was chewing up the desert around it. On May 17, 2000, at the Park Service's request, Pacific Bell removed the booth and retired the number. Visitors kept coming anyway and treated the concrete pad like a grave, leaving offerings, so the pad was broken up and hauled off too. Even a headstone-style plaque that appeared later was removed. There is nothing there now, just the Joshua trees, the dirt crossroads, and a silence that, for one strange moment in history, the whole world interrupted. Number 3. Devil's Hole. The hole with the whole world in it. This is the one I asked you to stay for. In the Amargosa Valley of Nevada, surrounded by chain-link fence and razor wire, there is an opening in the side of a hill about 12 feet wide. Inside it is water, 92 degrees, perfectly still, and more than 500 feet deep. Divers have descended past 430 feet. The bottom has never been found or mapped. On July 29, 2025, a magnitude 8.8 earthquake struck off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. 21 minutes later, the water in this hole in Nevada began to rise and fall. It was not the first time. The 2019 Ridgecrest earthquake threw a wave 10 feet up these rock walls. A 2022 quake in Mexico sent 4-foot waves through it. Earthquakes in Japan, Indonesia, and Chile have all made this pool slosh like a bathtub. Devil's Hole is a window into a vast desert aquifer, and it registers the planet's violence from thousands of miles away, and the entire world's supply of one animal lives in the top of it. The Devil's Hole pupfish is an inch of iridescent blue that exists nowhere else on Earth. The species has been trapped in this one pool for something like 10,000 years, the smallest natural range of any vertebrate on the planet. The whole population feeds and spawns on a single shallow rock shelf near the surface, which means every one of those earthquake waves scours away their food and their eggs. In 2013, the count fell to about 3 dozen fish, 3 dozen total on Earth. People have gone to extraordinary lengths over them. When groundwater pumping in the 1960s began draining the shelf, the fight went all the way up, and in 1976, the United States Supreme Court ruled to protect the water. When 2 young divers slipped into the hole in 1965 and never surfaced, their bodies were never recovered. They are still somewhere below, past where the maps end. That is why the fence and the razor wire went up. Federal and state biologists now count the fish twice a year, scuba teams below, spotters above. And after that, 2022 earthquake swept the shelf clean. The next count came back at 263 Jiao, the best number in 19 years. The shaking that should ruin them sometimes resets their world instead. A bottomless hole that feels earthquakes from Russia, guarded like a bank vault to protect a fish shorter than your thumb. Nothing else on this list is stranger, and all of it is documented. Number 2. Death Valley Junction. Population: almost nobody. Death. Valley Junction was born a company town. The Pacific Coast Borax Company built it in the early 1920s. Whitewashed adobe around a courtyard, with a community hall called Corkle Hall, where the miners held their dances, church services, movies, and funerals. By the mid-1920s, the borax operation moved on, and the desert began taking the town back. The railroad that justified it was torn up in the 1940s, and the tracks were shipped to Egypt to serve the Allied war effort in North Africa. What remained changed hands for decades. A hotel, a row of ruins, and a social hall full of mud and rain damage at a lonely junction where the population has at times dropped below 4 people. That is the entire story of Death Valley Junction, until a tire went flat. Number 1. The Amargosa Opera House, the woman who painted her own audience. In March 1967, a New York dancer named Marta Beckett was on break from touring her one-woman show when her car picked up a flat near that junction. While her husband dealt with the tire at the gas station, she wandered across the road, found the abandoned social hall, and looked through a hole in the back door. Inside were warped floors, 16 inches of dried mud, and rust-stained walls. She would later say the building spoke to her. "Take me, do something with me, I offer you life." She tracked down the property manager and rented the ruin for $45 a month, repairs her responsibility, the deal sealed with a promissory note and a single dollar bill. She was 43 years old, a veteran of Broadway and Radio City Music Hall, and she walked away from all of it to run a theater at a ghost junction where, some nights, no human being would come. So she made sure she would never dance to an empty room. Beginning in 1968, Marta Beckett spent 4 years painting a permanent audience onto the walls. A full 16th century Spanish court. King and queen, nobility, monks, nuns, bullfighters, ladies of the night, royal children with their governess, her own 2 cats curled beneath the painted seats. Then she painted the ceiling, blue sky and cherubs. Her stage lights were made from Folgers coffee cans. Her first show in 1968 drew 12 living people. And then she simply never stopped. From 1972 until 2012, 40 years. She performed on that stage every Friday, Saturday, and Monday night, rain or shine, with or without an audience, in a place where summer reaches 120 degrees. Word spread, and the world started showing up. Tour buses, film crews, a documentary, obituaries in the national press. Her final performance was February 12, 2012. She died in 2017 at 92, at home in Death Valley Junction, and the nonprofit she founded still keeps the theater and its murals alive, hosting performers who make the pilgrimage to her stage. The town produced borax, and the borax ran out. The railroad left for another continent. Every practical reason for Death Valley Junction to exist died decades ago. What survived is a room where a woman painted herself an audience so she would never dance alone. And for 45 years, she never did. 10 stops across one desert, and we went from 2 cousins solving a 100-year mystery to 1 dancer refusing an empty room. Most of what the Mojave holds is like this. Not lost, exactly. Just waiting past the end of the pavement. For me, it is Devil's Hole, a bottomless pool that flinches at earthquakes in Russia, holding the last of an entire species. That one will stay with me. Which of these did you already know, and what did we miss out there? Tell me in the comments. The best answers become future videos. If this kind of forgotten American history is what you are after, subscribe.